of Employment and Economic Development. And this is today's offering of what we call small business, the Small Business Call, which is a second Tuesday of every month. We provide an opportunity for people to call in and speak among themselves and with the staff here and other interested and affected parties about topics that are of interest to and importance to small businesses. And today we're going to be talking about tariffs, both the tariffs we impose and the reciprocal tariffs, a topic which has changed its importance very much in recent days. If we were having this conversation a year ago, it would be almost historical in nature. I would mention that tariffs, the imposition of tariffs by the United States goes back to colonial times or to the early days of the country when the having of what were called high protective tariffs was considered an important policy for the United States to prevent foreign competition and to ensure the growth of industry. And it worked. And it worked quite well. By the time of the Civil War, 60% of the federal budget was collected from tariffs at just one location, the Port of New York. An astonishing amount when you consider it. Further on, a big chunk of the federal budget was continued to be collected by tariffs up until the passage of the 16th Amendment in 1916, which brought the income tax and changed completely the way in which the federal government derived its revenue. Tariffs were also imposed in retaliation, if you want to use that word, or in retribution for actions by the United States. The most famous event of this was the imposition of the United States, the U.S.'s tariffs in the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1934, which raised tariffs on imported goods for like 50%, and other countries reciprocated as well, causing very serious financial disruption during the first days of the Depression. So they've been around, even if they're not something that we talk about a great deal. If it's something that's really only been interest to economic historians and trade lawyers. But we know now, if you just turn on the TV, and it's a tremendous personal experience for a lot of people. The Dow Jones average dropped 1,000 points yesterday. It dropped 600 points this morning. If you understand the threat by Canada to impose a 50% tariff on electricity exported to Minnesota, that will definitely have an impact on people. So one of the business questions we've asked Lawrence to address today is, what is one to do if you are a small business? If you are somewhere in this supply chain of pieces and parts that come from various places and in which there are tariffs imposed at various points. What can you do for this? Can you escape the tariffs? Or should we escape them? Or should there something else that could be done? So again, here's Lawrence Rezatar for the Trade Office.
Thanks, Charles. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. As Charles mentioned, my name is Lawrence Rezatar. I'm in the Minnesota Trade Office, the Deputy Director there and the Director of International Business Strategy. And I appreciate you all giving your time on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon to learn a little bit more about what the state of play is, where things are going, and then to Charles's last question, what you can probably do or try to figure out how to do to mitigate some of the impacts. If it's all right, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got some slides that we can kind of run through and make sure at the initial part, we're all kind of talking from the same set of information. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. All right, hold on. Okay, there we go. The agenda, I just wanted to define define countermeasures and tariffs and their operation, give you a little example of trade agreements, put some of this into context, Minnesota exports of goods and imports of goods, and then get into the countermeasures. But first, before we start, this is a QR code that goes to a Microsoft form. If anybody has any stories about the impact of the tariffs, things that they're seeing within their business, if you wouldn't mind sharing those with us, we would appreciate it. We're trying to collect some of the stories of people that are working on this and see if there's opportunities to share best practices, figure out maybe different solutions, and try to see if collectively we can come to some sort of support around these, knowing that it's Tuesday at 2 o'clock. By the time this call ends, there might have been announcements to change things. But if we can collect some of the challenges that you're all facing, we might be able to help craft some broader solutions for the businesses in Minnesota. So, just definitionally, a tariff is a tax on a good imported into a country. So this is something that is tangible, that is crossing a border into the United States. They are typically assessed as a percentage of the purchase price, and they're collected when the goods clear customs as part of the importing process. The brokers and the entities that import have a direct payment account that goes to Customs and Border Patrol, and they just pay them immediately whatever the assessed value of the tariff is. And that's that importer that pays the tax. So it does not operate like an export license or an import license where the entity sending the goods is responsible for paying the tax. It is really collected from the importer. And so tariffs raise the price of the imported good. It assesses an additional cost based on the value of that good to be able to sell it in the market. And again, the tariffs and countermeasures are applied to products, not services. So tariffs apply to imports. Countermeasures, as Charles used, retaliatory tariffs, apply to the exports, and they're assessed with our product entering the other country. So it isn't based on the product that is coming from the other country into the United States. It is based on the product from the United States going elsewhere. And this just gives you a sense of what our trade in goods looks like for Minnesota. So over the last 6 years, even adjusting for inflation, we've had a nearly 50% growth in our total trade, imports and exports. We've seen substantial growth with Canada and then China and Mexico being our leading markets. And we've outperformed the United States when we look at what our total trade looks like. Our exports of goods supports around just under 120,000 jobs. Most of our exporters are small and medium-sized businesses. It is folks that are in the supply chain, maybe even selling finished goods, sending them overseas. And I believe you met with Gabrielle Gerbeau on one of these calls, and she's the executive director of the Minnesota Trade Office. She probably talked about the fact that a lot of our small and medium-sized businesses find themselves exporting accidentally. There is a customer from overseas who submits a product request. They have a client who opens an overseas operation or acquires an entity in a different country and wants the Minnesota entity to continue supplying them. So now they are in the business of sending their goods overseas to Canada, Mexico, elsewhere. In Minnesota, our total exports were about $27 billion. Our top 5 markets that we're selling into, Canada, Mexico, China, Japan, and Ireland. Interestingly, Canada and the relationship between the U.S. and Ontario and Manitoba has been in the news a lot lately. If Manitoba alone were our export market, I think it would be the third largest export market for Minnesota. We send more product into Manitoba than we do even to China. I'm sorry, Ontario. Ontario would be our third largest export market. We send more goods into Ontario than we do to China. And Manitoba would be fourth ahead of Japan. We actually sell more goods into Manitoba than we do to Japan. And that just gives you some of an idea on the depth and the complexity of the trade relationship with Canada. Our largest products, a lot of medical equipment, machinery, electrical equipment, a lot of that is going into as components that are being sent to the to entities that are integrating that into other products. It is really a diverse export market that we have here. As far as importing, Canada again leads. China is second, Mexico's third. Interestingly, Vietnam has moved into the top 10. I don't think 5 years ago you would have seen Vietnam in this position, but as some of the tariffs were applied to China, Chinese manufacturers and entities looked for other markets to produce their goods. And Vietnam saw a surge in manufacturing facilities constructed in Vietnam to sell into the United States. Our number one import is largely from Canada, and it's our gasoline. The petroleum we receive from Canada is what's at our pumps. It's what's driving our cars. After that, it's going to be a lot of the medical components that go into different products, different elements of machinery and electrical equipment. Again, it is a very, very diversified import base that we have. Now for trade agreements. You've probably heard at different points that the United States has free trade agreements, and we do. We have 14 free trade agreements with 20 countries. It ranges from Singapore to Canada and Mexico. We don't have a Jordan is another one. We don't have a free trade agreement with China, but we do have the US-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, or the USMCA. It replaced NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, that had been in effect from 1994 until 2020. When NAFTA was written, the internet didn't exist in the way we know it now. Manufacturing was a very, very different industry. And in 2020, the USMCA entered into force to modernize and replace NAFTA. It is, interestingly, subject to a joint review next year. And if there isn't a commitment by July of 2026 to continuing the agreement, it begins a wind down period. So that potentially the USMCA could term on its own if the three parties don't agree to it. The China Phase 1 agreement was signed in 2020 during the first Trump administration. It really was just a kind of foundational document that addressed some of the structural changes that the United States was looking for from China. It also made a position the U.S. and U.S. goods to get some better treatment in China. But it was not a free trade agreement, and there were elements that came along with it on the implementation that are going to be there, hopefully, to facilitate more market entry, or at least they were before a couple of weeks ago. So where do we stand today? The U.S. tariff policies, we have a tariff that we assess of 25% on non-energy imports and 10% on energy imports from Canada. And then we have tariffs of 25% on imports from Mexico. Now, those have been, most of those have been postponed or held off for another month. It's like, I think they were in place for about 24 hours on February 2nd or 3rd. They were in place for maybe 24 hours for Canada on March 4th. But the Trump administration continues to kind of extend or exempt the the imposition of these um, as they continue talking with the governments of Canada and Mexico. One of the things that we did see was that certain products such as potash were have a reduced tariff, and this is something that is important for our fertilizer industry. So it falls in a category of sort of goods that are a little bit more necessary for the functioning of the American economy, according to the Trump administration. We also have a flat tariff of 20% on all imports from China, including Hong Kong. Um, this was a doubling from what was originally announced in February of 2025, but it continues a 7-year run of U.S. tariffs on imports from China. It was the first Trump administration's policy. It continued through the Biden administration. And the impact in Minnesota is about 2/3 of the goods that we import from China are subject to those tariffs. Now, as I mentioned before, there's the surge in the imports from Vietnam, and that has been a bit of a strategic move by Chinese companies to avoid some of the tariffs and what they might charge or be assessed on the goods they're importing into the United States. But overall, what we've seen is a drop off in total trade with China. We have and this is in 2024 dollars, an 8% increase in exports to China. But as we said earlier, Minnesota global exports grew substantially. And in imports from China, those are down 8%, but our other imports grew substantially of 65%. So these tariffs really do have a pretty important and long-lasting effect on trade flows and the way supply chains are organized. Now, what comes next, right? This has a giant asterisk after it. And as I said earlier, like we started this call at 2 o'clock and things might change by the time the call ends. But this is, I think, where we're seeing some things start to move. And as the Trump administration has laid it out, this is where they could go. So tariffs of 25%, I think it doubled this morning.
Yes.
Yeah. On iron, steel, and aluminum. And that should go into effect tomorrow. He says quizzically, it might go into effect tomorrow. It might get delayed. Vehicles are an interesting thing. 25% on imports from all countries, and the exemption for Canada and Mexico until early April 2025, just because the supply chain is so massive. And if you've been following the news and you've heard about the Ontario Premier Doug Ford discussing tariffs for Ontario, the bulk of their trade with the United States is in the automotive industry. So it's a lot of cross-border automotive.
Oh, you get an extra day.
We do not have that same focus here. That's not the nature of a lot of our trade with Ontario, but it is a critical thing. And some of the vehicles that you saw exempted were from Ford, GM, and Stellantis. What you didn't see included in that initial exemption were vehicles from Honda, Toyota, and other non-US manufacturers that do utilize that cross-border relationship for inputs into their final vehicles. So all of these automotive companies have really integrated supply chains that move back and forth across the border all the time. And so far, what we saw was the delay for the 3 U.S. car manufacturers. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out for anybody here that might have a Honda, Toyota, or other foreign car makers as customers. with the implementation of these and where it goes. Semiconductors, it's potential 25% on imports from all countries. We import a substantial amount of our semiconductors from Taiwan and other spots in Asia. So this could be a pretty big impact on our pharmaceuticals. Again, we import a large amount of our antibiotics, whether it's penicillin or amoxicillin, from other markets. And so that could have a pretty big effect on pricing. There's been talk about the tariffs being applied to the EU. We do not have a free trade agreement with the European Union, and we don't have one with the UK either. We don't know how it's going to shake out, but the EU is, I think, frankly, starting to prepare for what that means. And then we have the countermeasures. So these are the reciprocal tariffs that are applied. China has rolled out countermeasures that are going to impact a decent amount of our exports to China, more than half of what we send there. It includes a lot of agricultural products. It is certainly going to have a major impact on our ag community. In Mexico, nothing has been announced yet, but we'll see how that unfolds. In Canada, we had the first rounds of countermeasures that would have been effective. I guess they are effective as of March 4th. They had a new leadership election, and the new prime minister is Mark Carney from the Liberal Party, which is the same party as former Prime Minister Trudeau. Those countermeasures impacted about $621 million of Minnesota exports. The potential second round of tariffs would be really big. It would include about $86 billion of additional imports from the United States. Prime Minister Carney has not made any announcements, but in the provinces, some of them are taking their own steps. As you've probably read about, Ontario now imposes a 25% surcharge on electricity sold to the United States. Minnesota is one of the 3 states that receives essentially backup electricity through something called the MISO, MISO grid from Ontario. It isn't, frankly, a huge deal at this point. It really comes into effect in cases of severe need for electricity, but it could raise some bills because the electricity utilities might have to go out and buy electricity on the spot market if that surcharge raises the cost. The other thing that we've seen in a potential countermeasure, is the idea that Manitoba, the province, just to our northwest, might, they have a large hydro facility there, and Manitoba Hydro sells a substantial amount of hydroelectricity, carbon-free electricity, into Minnesota. Manitoba Hydro is going to need a lot of maintenance work and some repairs and renovations and new lines constructed. And there is at least an initial indication by the government, which owns Manitoba Hydro, that they might exclude any companies from countries that are engaged in a trade dispute with Canada from bidding on that work. So it's not a straight countermeasure, but it's kind of a knock-on effect that could happen. So that was a lot. Adji, this is like a lot of table setting and kind of give you a sense of where we are. Again, this is the request. I can also probably send you all a link, or I can post in the chat. But if you click on this QR code, it'll take you to a pretty brief questionnaire. As I said, we're trying to collect the stories of Minnesota businesses and the impacts that these tariffs are having, so that we can start to see if there's broader trends here, if there are things that we can address to maybe mitigate some of the risk, and is there an opportunity to share some best practices, which is part of the reason for this call. And we would love to hear from you all on it. I created the form So if it's not all that helpful, I apologize, but it should be pretty quick. Tried to make it something where we understand that you aren't in the business of completing online forms. You're in the business of trying to sell your goods, your services, and making revenue. So we wanted to make it as efficient as possible, but we would really love to hear more from you on that. And then this is my contact information. If you need to reach the trade office, this link, the minnesota.gov/d/business/exporting, is a way to get in touch with us in the trade office. The trade office itself is about 11 people that work to facilitate the international commercial engagements on behalf of the state of Minnesota and for the entities in the state of Minnesota. We have experts like Barb Matson, who's on the call. Barb has been with the trade office for nearly her entire career. She probably forgets more about the US and Minnesota-Canada relationship in an afternoon than I've known in my whole life. She knows everybody on the sides of the border and what they do and how they do it, and is a tremendous resource. We similarly have people that are focused on Mexico, Europe, China, Asia more generally. We have experts in different industries that understand how these countries are looking at US goods and services in particular industries to support what they're doing there and to buy what they believe is some of the best of the best. So you can reach out to us using the business/exporting website. And then my cell phone number is up there and my email. So with that, I'll stop sharing and then get to probably the more interesting stuff. What do you do, right? Like how do you deal with this? And the answers are, one, in 2018 and 2019, we saw a lot of companies absorb the costs of the tariffs into their margins, or they use their reserves. And they, rather than turning up the prices immediately, they kind of did it as a dial, right? And some of that was probably reflected in the inflation we saw in 2021, 2022, 2023, as companies were then starting to kind of process these additional costs and pass them on to the consumers. Some of it was just trying to find ways to get exemptions for their products or reclassify some of their products, because not the way in which you classify your product can have a tremendous impact on the way that any tariffs are assessed, and making sure that you've thought through how you want to classify something can be a tremendous benefit to your business. What we also saw from some larger businesses that had the ability to absorb the cost and the overhead in doing it is the use of foreign trade zones. So a foreign trade zone is a legal fiction. It is basically the idea that some products haven't entered the United States stream of commerce, even though they might have entered the United States, for the purpose of assessing any duties that would be owed on those products for entering the United States stream of commerce. And it's really kind of a cash flow solution. It's a way to sort of mitigate your exposure if you're bringing in components that are going to go used into something else, or if you're bringing in something, a product to add value to and then re-exporting it. It doesn't work for everybody. It is not a cure-all, and it does have substantial overhead and reporting requirements, because it's this kind of special fictional provision. Well, it's a real provision, but it's a legal fiction that says, like, this product never entered the United States. And Customs and Border Patrol wants to know that that is actually true, that people aren't using this as an end around to avoid paying tariffs. So it can be a solution. So the kind of three things we've seen have been just absorbing, being really smart about the classification, and using some of these foreign trade zones to mitigate some of the the cash flow necessity. I would add to that one thing to do, in addition to sharing the information that we requested on the QR code, is to work with Enterprise Minnesota or the Chamber of Commerce or us in the trade office, um, and see if we can work with some of our large multinationals that are coming up with these solutions as well and share those best practices. One big area of concern that we've identified has been the cost of bonds for importing the products into the United States for small and medium-sized enterprises. And when these tariffs get assessed, it can increase the amount of the bond that you need to have available for CBP. I don't know that anybody has come up with a good solution on how to do that and how to mitigate and absorb some of that risk. But I think as a state and as an entity at Deed, we're open to hearing what people want to do if they've heard something that's been effective elsewhere, to share that with us. And then we can see about trying to craft something that either becomes a policy or a procedure or just shares some simple things that some of the larger companies have learned how to do to mitigate against the uncertainty that these tariffs would cause. So it's probably not the happiest, rosiest picture, but it gives you a little bit of a sense of maybe where we are, and what we're looking at that. And I have now talked for plenty long enough. Charles, if there's other issues you'd like me to address, happy to take them on. If there's other questions from the group, please fire away.
I have a question here, and that is one that's really impossible to answer, but I would like to have some opinion on this, and that's how long should a business be prepared to wait this out? I don't mean to resolution, but how long will the uncertainty of what's going to happen last? I mean, if you were to turn on the news now, nothing, as you said earlier today, is the same from one half hour to the next. But businesses have to go and make their decisions about their supply chains. How long should they be prepared to wait things out? And how long have they had to wait in the past when this has happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm just looking, trying to get the timing of the 2018 one was, what was it? Was it 4 months? Trying to remember when it got resolved. Um, it I think it went on for a decent amount. The China tariffs never disappeared, even
Yeah.
when the administration changed. Um, this opinion is worth as much as anybody has paid for it. But I think I would, and what we've heard businesses say, and I think this is smart, is in as much as they're planning for the next 6 months, coming up with alternatives for their their supply chain, and trying to identify other producers of the things they need to integrate into their products, and then being ready to implement pricing changes, from 3 to 6 months out. I just think that that's probably, it seems maybe unnecessary because none of this might go forward. We might have the same sort of situation where tariffs are in place for 24, 48 hours, then they're withdrawn, then they're reinstituted. Unlike in 2018, when there was a move towards a new trade agreement with the USMCA, it doesn't feel like there's some larger agreement out there that this is directed towards. And I think that's one of the reasons that it makes it so tricky. I don't know if that was much of an answer. I mean, I think like
It is, and there's a related question here, and that is not regarding export financing, but regarding general working capital financing. What's a business tell his banker? What do you say to the bank about the impact of this and the potential amount of time it will take and potential damage?
Yeah. Um, it's a really hard one. I don't, I mean, if your inputs are you're bringing in product, and you are losing, margin because of it, because of the tariffs, or all of a sudden your products are not price competitive in Canada because of the tariffs that are being assessed when your product enters the market. I don't know what you tell your banker at that point.
Well,
Um,
one question the banker is going to ask is, can you get this product someplace else?
yeah,
Can you go to another country, another market?
yeah, I think that's what I think you need to do, for the next 6 months about trying to figure out alternative places for your supply chain, and really start to analyze that. Um, Understanding that, they're, especially with Canada, it's not like a lot of products out of Canada are coming out of Canada because they're low cost. The trade liberalization model of the last 80 years was moving products to where you get the best product at the lowest cost.
Yes.
And it was both best and lowest. It wasn't just lowest, it was the best product at the lowest cost. Um, if you're getting from Canada, it seems you're purchasing from Canada, it seems unlikely that you're maybe there because of the lowest cost. I don't know. Maybe there's some products out of Canada that are markedly cheaper, but nothing's coming to mind right away. Um, but if now you're in the market for other places, I think what you would do in your economic modeling is take what these tariffs look like, and let's say you're buying from Canada at $1, right? I'm just $1 a unit, and you're looking at
Right.
a 25% import. So now you're looking a 25% import tariff. Now you're looking at the product costing you $1.25. That gives you the delta to go out in the market and figure out what you do with this, right? So maybe you look for products at $1.10, $1.15, because you still have that margin that's cheaper than the $1.25. You can replace the product at a somewhat cheaper rate than the duty. The problem then that you have and the risk you run is if you put these contracts in and you're buying stuff that's going to be, delivered in 6 months and the tariffs disappear, now you're stuck with a product that's at a higher price maybe than you would have been had you continued to buy from Canada and the tariff was rescinded. And so it's a bit of a, you're paying a lot of probability odds, but I think that's one way to look at, replacement goods, and the way you could at least sketch out how you can make an economic model for your products or your services that work.
Okay. Thank you. Uh, Anybody else has any questions, please jump right in here. We no need to ask. Just voice them here and we'll have Lawrence see if he can answer them.
You can hear me?
Yes.
I'm just curious. By the way, Lawrence, thank you so much. I'm just curious. Um, Goods that have already been earmarked, for example, like already been agreed or purchased, will they be subject to these tariffs or it will pass?
Yeah, Richard, just so I understand, you're saying for products that have already been purchased, have not been delivered yet, but payment is contingent on the delivery. How does this affect them?
Yes, please.
Yeah, uh, it will be assessed. So if the tariffs go forward, the fact that it was purchased ahead of time before the tariffs were implemented and just hadn't been delivered really isn't of the concern for Customs and Border Patrol. They're just sort of like, well, you were unlucky. It's not going to necessarily impact that. And that's where, as a small business, working with your importer, figuring out what you can do to try to come up with some sort of solutions, mitigate some of the risk on it, and then working it through. But I wish there was a better answer, but it really is CBP's just what we've been told is CBP isn't gonna, they're not gonna care about that.
Anyone else? Any final shots from you, Lawrence?
No, I think if you all don't mind sharing in that QR code, the state of Minnesota as itself as an enterprise really doesn't engage in a lot of international commerce. So we rely on hearing from you all, and particularly as you saw earlier, most of our exporters are small and medium-sized businesses, and hearing from you all on the challenges you're facing, like maybe some solutions you've heard of or something that you feel would make it a little bit easier for you. And we really want to try to be that voice, facilitate that engagement at the state level and also at the national level, and then try to share best practices so that you all can get back to the things you do best, which is deliver amazing goods and services that people really want, the solutions they need. And then, you don't have to worry about tariff wars or anything like that.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much, Lawrence. I very much appreciate your presentation here, which was indeed informative. And we'll see how quickly people can act on it and what the results will be, and how quickly the counterparties in the other countries decide to do something or not do something in response to what the U.S. government does. Let me just ask one question of the staff here. Maddie, we're recording this. Are we prepared to give people a recording?
Yes, we are.
How do they get it?
The recording will be posted on the Small Business Assistance Office website.
Okay, that's great. Okay. Well, very much then. Thank you all. I think this has been very useful and certainly very timely. And I want to thank our presenter and especially all of you who took the time to come here today and ask these questions. See you all later. Thank you.